Reimagining Success, episode 253. You're listening to the Reimagining Success podcast, where we help you design a business and a life that allows you freedom from the 9 to 5. I'm your host, Anna Lundberg, ex-corporate good girl, now a business mentor and coach, author, mum of 2, and I'm here to help you create more freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment. Now let's get started with redefining success outside of the 9 to 5. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another interview. And it's a special one for me today because Jana and I met a long time ago. And now I should have checked what year it was, but really it was around the time that I was first experiencing my own escape from the 9 to 5. One of the books that changed the game for me while I was traveling, in fact, it was on my sabbatical when I was 2013, I was off in South America. I read Chris Gilbo's The Art of the Nonconformist Life, I want to say, on my Kindle. And he was amazing because even though he had a huge following and this big conference in America, I tweeted at him. At the time I was active on Twitter, and I asked, hey, I'd love to come to your conference in Oregon, but it's so far away. And at the time, I guess I hadn't quite started traveling. I don't know why I didn't just go. And he said, oh, you need to talk to Jana over in Germany. She's organizing this Alive conference, which I then came along to. And in fact, apologies for the long introduction, but this is something we talked about in our original conversation. So I think we won't go too much into that today, but anyone who's interested, I'll pull out the old interview from many years ago. And at that conference, I met, first of all, a lot of the people who have been on this podcast and who are in my first book, Leaving the Corporate 9 to 5. Secondly, I met Dave Cornthwaite and Emily Penn. One of I think the last slide on one of their presentations was, we're paddleboarding down the Mississippi later this year. And I was like, yep, sign me up for that one. So I went there and I met people there who've since been working with me in my programs, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess this is all to say, Jana, a huge thank you to you because although you've been sort of there on the sidelines in a way, but thanks to that thing that you organize, you never know the unexpected things that will happen. And even though the conference and that community in the exact form didn't continue, my goodness, the reverberations, certainly for me personally, have been tremendous. So thanks to you, and also, for everybody listening to hear the serendipitous little meetings and things that can happen.
I don't think I knew that, actually. Thanks for the very kind words. I don't think I knew the whole story that Chris actually pointed you to the Alive conference. But yeah, he obviously came as a speaker, and actually, funny side note, similar to what you were sharing, when I had the idea for the Alive in Berlin conference, it was largely because I had been going to the US for these all the time from Europe. I was living in the UK at the time. And I felt like, man, we need more of this. And in Europe, and I picked Berlin because it felt like central, easy and cheap to get to. And in my mind, I thought, I'm going to ask Chris and I'm going to ask Pam Slam. And if they both say yes, I'm going to have to do it. So I asked them and they both said yes. And then I was like, oh dear, now I got to, rally and make it happen. So it took me 9 months from that summer of August 2013, till May 2014, which was the first year of the Alive conference. And so, I've had lovely messages and still sometimes do get messages from people who had made connections, and then one thing led to another and led to another. So that's really wonderful to hear. And it just goes to show, if you have an idea, then, do it no matter what, because it could make a big impact on people's lives. So yeah,
it absolutely does. And I think, that's a whole conversation we can have. But in terms of measuring success, we look so much and it's so hard, especially when people are starting out in their business, for example. Oh my gosh, I've only got 3 people showing up to my webinar and no one's watching it, and so on. And you forget that each of those people is someone who, first of all, is trusting you with their time and possibly money and so on. And secondly, they are talking to other people, and the ripple effect of things you just don't think about. I think we're so obsessed with these big numbers of, I need millions of followers on LinkedIn and so on. When I say we, I guess we as a society,
general public,
easy to get pulled in that direction.
And I think with regards to the, quote unquote definition of success, I think the Alive conference, we had about 150 people in both years. And it was really hard to sell all the seats and, get the volunteers on board and stuff. And I remember that in order to kind of grow the community a little bit, I had Alive in Loughborough in England and Alive in this, just little meetups register on meetup.com. And so some people met, in Alive in Hamburg at their little meetup and stuff like that. So people organized themselves, but there were a number of them where I sat there by myself. So this is, this is part of the picture, and as people may or may not know or remember, I'm not sure if we talked about this in the first podcast, financially, this was not a success, the conference, but for me personally, and for so many people, it was absolutely life-changing, so I guess it depends on what you want in the end, and whether it was 100 people or, Chris Gilmore went from like 1,000 or a few hundred, 1,000 to like 3,000. And then was like, no, actually my reimagined success is actually going back to 1,000 because the feeling was different. So the last few were just 1,000 people. So, it was an exciting time and certainly life-changing for me. And I, unintentionally, I guess, created that for myself, because I wanted to feel alive in all areas of life. And I still stand for that now, all these many years later, because I actually went, I kind of had this feeling of like, oh man, I feel hypocritical. I'm proposing that we feel alive in, at work, in our relationships, in our, adventures and travels. And here I was kind of dying in my former relationship. And so that really was a big catalyst to, separate and move on and all the things that happened after. But basically starting a second life.
Yeah. And isn't that always the case, right? We create what we need for ourselves. And I don't think that's inauthentic at all. If anything, that's the whole vulnerability and courage and so on. And you mentioned, what you want in the end. I mean, it's hard to know what the end point is, if not death and so on. But I think the long haul, being in it for the long haul, the long term, it's just stepping stones along the way. So the conference, huge endeavor. And my goodness, what a success to get Chris and Pam coming along and everything you created around that. And yet it was financial failure. And also it was only one of many things that you've done since then. I know at the time you were skydiving, you had dyed your hair and, probably enjoying maybe the single life, and I think things have evolved a little bit. So I guess before we dive even deeper, because it's already so interesting, why don't you tell us, and you've also moved to America, ironically, after this whole conversation of bringing things over to Europe. So where are you now? And I guess in a couple of sentences, right? What's happened? Well, it's hard to say since our last conversation, but maybe just give us a little flavor of what's happened for you.
Yeah, happy to. I think, probably like you believe as well, especially given this podcast, I feel like we constantly keep evolving the different parts of life in order to define what success means for us in the moment, right? And so at the time in 2014, 15, when we held the conferences, you're right, I was just I had made this commitment to myself that I would only do the things that would make me feel alive. So hence the skydiving. And then I moved to Hawaii for a while, and I actually did my skydiving license in Texas for a while. And I dyed my hair. I started actually very tamely with just some pink streaks, and then it just got crazy. So if you want to look back on some photos, you will see some rainbow hair. But it was really just, any connection, any work opportunity. I also at that time left Tony Robbins because I was coaching for Tony Robbins because I was not feeling alive doing that work, doing call after call after call, and not being able to like dive deeply in with the clients because it was so, half hour, 45-minute sessions and just high turnover of calls. So I was kind of, at this crossroads, and I was like, oh, the money, but and I loved that community too. I had an amazing team that I connected with for the years at Tony Robbins' company, but it was not filling my cup, right? And so one of the things that I did was pursue sort of the inner search around my relationships and why my previous marriage had failed. We'd been together for 12 years. He's a wonderful person. So why didn't it work out? Why couldn't we connect? And so one of those things led me down towards the classes and material from David Data, who's based in California, who some of you may know, some may not, but he's basically an expert in all things relationship, intimacy, tantric yoga, that sort of thing. And I followed down the rabbit hole with David Data and a couple of other teachers that took me then to Los Angeles. So I traveled between Hawaii and LA and Texas for my skydiving and Berlin for the conference. It was quite a busy flight time. But in LA, I met Chris, who's now my husband, at a kind of a yogic weekend retreat. And we were not my mind was not in for another long-term relationship. I was not really pursuing that. but our connection was really, really strong, and we just kept seeing each other. And eventually there came a point where we had to make a decision, like, are we going to like be all in or what? And so he ended up, because I was at the time still and already nomadic, fully nomadic. So I'd left England, left all my stuff, just really had the suitcase and the backpack and the laptop. And I had traveled, spent most of my time in the first couple of years in Southeast Asia and Europe, and just back and forth that I was just describing, with probably the most parts of that in Hawaii. And he joined me on that journey. So he sold all of his stuff and quit his job in Orange County, like in where he was living in Southern California. And then came on the road with me, and I had an opportunity for some work in London. I actually ended up being in London in 2016 for a little bit, in and out, working with a company that did Forex trading. So all the while I was coaching, doing some work with this company in London, also learning to trade Forex at the time, which, was not, it very quickly turned out was not really making me feel alive. But, I was kind of roped in for that for like a year. And so we would kind of come through London a fair bit. And Berlin still was a big hub for us at the time because, we were then playing this visa game of like how many days could we stay in which place, because he has an American passport, I have a German passport, and we can only stay in different places, especially the US and Europe, for so many days. And so, yeah, we traveled for quite a while together from January 2016 till February 2018, and basically had 2 years of an intense, honeymoon period of just being us, being the couple that we were, doing a lot of growth work together as a couple, spending time where other people go on vacation, and have their honeymoons in Thailand and Bali and places like that. And it was very cherished time, when we look back. Excuse me. Just drinking a sip of morning coffee because, it's morning for me. In any case, we kind of came to, in that sort of second phase of that, we were starting to look at, well, what are we really looking to create? I've always been very intentional about where do I want to live? What do I want to do for my work? Where do I want to take my life, really? And it was clear that I was turning, 2018, I would be turning like 36 or so, right? And around that time. And I certainly always saw myself as having children. And so we were like, well, if we want to have a family, it'd be kind of like now, like soon. And especially if we want more than one. And so we had to kind of think about what kind of places would be good for us to have our family, to be based out of. And it was very clear that in order to stay anywhere long term for more than 3 to 6 months, we would get married, because otherwise we couldn't, whether that's in the UK, whether that would be in Europe or anywhere else in the world. And so we ended up making it took us almost a year. Like, we made a big list of like locations, places in the world that we would consider to be based out of. And I would say that our top 5 were Thailand, Gozo in Malta. Actually, we spent quite a bit of time there. We loved it there. Spain, like we really liked Mallorca, but anywhere in Spain really we considered. Then in the US, we had a couple of places, and the 5th one was Panama. And it's because we knew that it was pretty easy to, be a resident of Panama. And so we looked at like, what do we need? What kind of community do we want? What amenities do we want? Western medicine was kind of important to us, which was one of the reasons why Thailand fell off the list. Especially having a baby, and especially being more quote unquote mature mom to be. We ended up choosing Washington State in America for a couple of reasons. One was that I just felt really drawn to part of his family there that was, that's still living there. That were just wonderful. I felt like, we would have a lot of support and just lots of love and great values of family around us there. And then the other was that since I was going to be working a bit less, especially in the immigration process where you're just not allowed to work, for a period of time, that he would have ease with finding work as a software engineer. And so Seattle was just a very obvious choice because lots of jobs there. And that's how it came to be. And while we were waiting for a fiancé visa through the embassy and the USCIS, it's called exactly, we got pregnant. And so then our lawyer was like, well, we might just, if you get married, then we can just change it into a spousal visa. It'd be much faster. And so we ended up doing that and had a very fast turnaround for a really sweet, wonderful wedding in Washington State. And then we really started to build our lives there for the last, from 2018 to November 21 is when we moved to Michigan here. And that was really a big shift because although we really liked our family there in Washington and how we'd landed there and the places we'd lived, and we'd moved into a nice house, we just we never quite put roots there. Like, it just never felt like this was our end point. And then in the fall of 2020, I found a thing called unschooling. And so at this time, my firstborn daughter was just under 2, about 20 months old. And we started thinking about, because we had gone through all the, attachment parenting steps of lots of, people who are familiar with that will know what that means. It's just very intense parenting mode of basically, bed sharing or co-sleeping, which we actually didn't do for a while, but lots of breastfeeding and carrying and those kinds of things. So very respectful, loving way of parenting. And it felt like it led naturally onto unschooling. And really, it was such an amazing fit when I started to learn about it. It just made sense to me because there's so much merit for me in the child always being given the freedom to choose what they want to learn, to follow their interests, and to be supported in those, as opposed to being prescribed what they need to be learning at different stages of their, schooling. And so I still coach a lot of people who are in their sort of, mid 30s or 40s even, and they're like, I don't even know how I got here, and I don't like this, and I don't even know what I like or what I'm passionate about. And I felt like if kids grew up that way, unschooling or free learning, as they call it too, then they wouldn't have that problem of needing to find themselves in their 30s because they've been allowed the space. And really, it's a luxury, right? It's a privilege to be able to explore what you want when you want, and just being loved and supported by a parent. But I felt like, hey, they wouldn't need someone like me in this.
Same. My whole job, my whole business idea would be gone if they, absolutely, if they followed their curiosity and passion. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I love this whole concept of just nurturing from below rather than being giving the structure from a top, And so when I look back, I was like, yeah, well, what did I learn at school that I'm using now? English, for sure. But that's about it. Anything that I did after school, my degree in marketing, my finance career, I learned all of that on the job. And I didn't need to have a specific thing. I think there's merit in certain forms of education, higher education, when you want to go into a particular career. But I also learned from grown unschoolers that there's nothing really preventing them from doing that later in their lives. If they choose to go into a specific direction that requires degrees and stuff like that, then great. Otherwise, I'd be encouraging them to, make their own stuff, be creative, and, create their own businesses by the age of 16. Probably.
I've actually, just as an aside, I've got a marketing colleague from my corporate time who has, I haven't talked to her in ages, and I recently reconnected, and she had, when I talked to her last, which was almost 10 years ago, she was retraining to be a doctor, and she's now, qualified doctor and doing that, which is really inspiring, because I would always flippantly say, oh, unless you want to be a doctor, of course, which you have to do when you're younger, but no, if you have the interest and dedication, you absolutely can do that later.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much data now and statistics about how universities really like to take homeschoolers and unschoolers because they're just intrinsically much more motivated. They're much more likely to, by a few percent, likely to complete their studies and stuff like that. So I was just, feeling quite encouraged on that journey. But then we started to look at, okay, well, where will we have that? Where will we have that opportunity? Obviously, in the US, school is not legally, required, like in Germany, for example, where you cannot do that. And so that was easy, but we definitely were looking for community, and we were looking for having an environment for our girls where they would be flourishing, right? of course, as any parent would want to have that. And so we started looking at different locations in the US and where we might find what we're looking for. And so we made, again, a big list of all the requirements that we are needing in a location. And in the end, both my husband and I arrived at Michigan as a state independently, actually, because he was looking at it from flooding risk, weather, tornadoes, sustainability for like the next 10, 20 years. And I was looking at it from the unschooling perspective. And I found this lady on Instagram through a podcast who I just loved following her because she was sharing her life with her 2 daughters. It was relatable because I have 2 daughters. And it was just looking beautiful. You know, it's always like beach and forest, and they were cycling, and, you know, it was just wonderful. And so I reached out to her at one point in end of September of 2021. And I said, where is this place? This looks amazing. And she was always documenting like the unschooling and homeschooling community and the co-op that they had founded and stuff. And so she said, oh, we're in Michigan, you know, up at Lake Superior. So I started looking around there and asked her again a couple of days later, well, where exactly is that? You know? So we started this little conversation. And within, I think, 6 days from that, finding out about this place called Marquette, Michigan, and the UP here at Lake Superior, I found our house. I just looked up on Zillow. I was like, this is our house. Like, it's got our name all over it. It's perfect for us. It was way out of our budget. And I was like, we're going to make it happen. This is our house. I just know. And so the flow really continued. We made an offer on that house on that same day and got that accepted. And we'd never bought a house, never applied to have a house, never applied to have a mortgage, you know, so we were really naive about the whole process. But it was interesting how there was so much energy flowing in that direction, working out. We got help from this person, help from that person. They connected us to this person. It was just amazing. It really wanted to happen, basically. And so with the help of my former babysitter, Cami, we will always be grateful for her because she basically saved my life in that time. I had a small, 9-10-month-old and Lily as a toddler, and we packed up the whole house and, moved us 2,000 miles east to here. And over about 6 days of road tripping with, small children. And so, but you can probably hear screaming in the background. Having fun, I assume. But yeah, so we landed here just the day before Thanksgiving in 2021. And, like a picture book, it started snowing when the movers came and unpacked our stuff. And it's just been enjoyable ever since. So yeah, we've really, for us, defined success in terms of life, in the way of like, we wanted to have a family. We had our 2 kids pretty close together. They're 25 months apart. And, it was, very much centered around setting up the life as a family that we wanted. And professionally, for my husband, Chris, it was an evolution of different, jobs in software, and now getting much more into AI and creative stuff. And for me, it, beautifully, I could continue what I was doing wherever I was anyway, and through the pregnancies and through the little years. I just kind of dialed it down a little bit. So it's really hard. I don't know if people were listening to, who might be able to put themselves into these shoes, but when you have a baby at first, you kind of think like, oh, well, they're always sleeping. But to time a planned coaching call with a client for a nap time that usually doesn't happen exactly when you need it to, and stuff like that was complicated. And I started, going for walks and carrying the baby and, kind of, doing audio calls or just really trying to make sure I could be available for my clients. And they were very generous and very understanding at that time too. So I could just retain my client base. And then in about April of last year, I started to like ramp things back up. And meanwhile, it took about 5.5 years for this whole immigration process to be over and to finally have the unlimited green card and like all of that sorted. So obviously in the middle of that, we had COVID, Corona, as they would say in German. So we were in lockdown and we just had babies, so it was kind of easy for us, to be honest. It wasn't like we weren't going to go anywhere anyways. But yeah, lots of things happened since then. And now I'm actually, you were mentioning this a little bit before the podcast. I'm like also in the stage of like reimagining my business. Been in business now for over 13 years. And it's always around the same sort of thing, which I figured out isn't actually as much career coaching or executive coaching as it is more to do with the niche of relationships, because my clients want to have a better feeling a relationship with themselves, with time, with their work. So I don't mean relationship coaching in the sense of like couples and finding love. Yeah, I know a little bit about that, but that's not my area of expertise. It's really more about what I call work-life integration, where we want to have it all, right? We want to have it all, especially, you know, as moms, but, you know, I coach a lot of men, and there's so much strain on the work aspect of life that they end up feeling not being present for family, not, you know, feeling guilty for taking time for themselves, and not feeling connected to their partners, or not feeling really freedom. And so it's still that work. And now I'm kind of in the process of, you know, growing. I have some revenue targets for the next couple of years. And so I'm kind of reevaluating how I'm going to do that, because I was all, you know, quite under the radar. I never really spent a lot of time marketing, building an email list or anything like that. So it feels like I'm starting a whole new business in that regard. I was very word of mouth and referral based for the last decade, at least. And so now it's like Instagram and, you know, building an audience, an email list, and online products. And really, I want to have an online business because it would continue to serve the life that we want to lead, right? I don't want to work more than 15, 20 hours a week. Currently, I do mostly about 5. And that works really well. And it's already a 6-figure business, but I just want to be able to create things that are, you know, at different price points for different people, but really are allowing us to basically, for Chris not to work and for us to be really family, and, you know, whether traveling family or not, but really just being a free learning family for the next decade.
Well, I mean, we're very much kindred spirits. I mean, work-life integration is one of my key pillars, and it's something that I play around with more and more, this idea of wholeness and the whole person and showing up as our whole selves. And I've been fortunate enough to create that for myself and just to be. So if I'm running a training online or in person with, I feel so, it's the same, right? I'm the same person. Obviously, there's still things that you share and not share, but it feels really wonderful. Whereas I know a lot of people feel perhaps that they have their sort of work persona and their home persona. What I heard you say, and thanks so much for sharing, and I think there's so many insights and experiences. So thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through that. A couple of things. One is I heard, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that it started with, you know, what makes me alive, and it's very me focused individual. And I think that's often the case when we first have that kind of transition and break away from work and relationships and so on. Then obviously you met Chris, and it became, what do we want to do as a couple, and that sort of honeymoon period, as it were. I love how you then made really intentional choices about where you want to live, and you two came together for that. And then, as you said, you're looking more at not only, but also your goals and your future as a family, and the longer term, and where you want to be longer. So I suppose that's an observation. I'd be curious to hear what you think of that. And secondly, did you, or have you grieved the identity of the previous section? Because I always get this, you know, the cliched metaphor of like the butterfly emerging, blah blah blah. It's true, but you know, the reality of the chrysalis is that it's very messy and painful, and that you have to kind of disintegrate before you can build yourself together. And I'm just curious, I also went through a very adventurous phase, which I sometimes think back to, you know, I was kind of going down that path, and I don't regret now living in a van and, you know, doing that whole life, which a lot of other people do, amazing things and so on. On the other hand, I do try, you know, I'm gradually trying to build in elements of more paddleboarding, and I've got my sailing license, and I would love to travel more and so on. But I'm curious about that kind of, the grieving process of having to let go, or choosing to rather let go of single, alive Jana, or having to let go of honeymoon period couple. You know, there's so many positives that come with the next phase, right? But there is still a process of your identity shifting, and your definition of success is changing as well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get you. So with regards to the first question, and the focus going from alive me, and then we as family, as 4 of us, I actually think now is, you know, it's obviously it's family first for me, clearly. I mean, you know, I think most people would probably say that it's true for them as well, but it's almost like now it's also going, the extension of that is now going into, I have the same bottom, going into them as well. So what I mean by that is, you know, part of why I'm shifting in the business is because it has been a lot about what works for me, what works for me, what works for me, right? And that has meant very high fees, for very little time in terms of, you know, the hours I spend. So, you know, several 5 figures for a year of working with me and stuff like that. And that is great for a certain audience. And I love that work. And I love one-on-one work. But, now the going from I to we is also going to the world, right? What can I actually contribute that's of value? What do people need, right? I have much more scope now that my glass is full. I can look at giving out again, or more in that way. So I think that's a very normal path of consciousness evolving, right? That we end up in that realm. And with regards to the grieving, I would say it's still there. Like, it's happening frequently. In fact, I had a big, I guess, awareness or insight distinction in the beginning of the year through one of my coaching programs that I was a part of for leadership development, where I realized that, there's a big part of me that was very much still struggling to reconcile that version of myself before children and now the version of myself now, because I was feeling really, and it was just me, and now it's all the kids, and especially because we're choosing to parent on hard mode, because if you do gentle parenting, attachment parenting, you're as child-led and child-focused, and we practice consent-based parenting, meaning that we totally trust and respect our children and their choices, even if they're only 2 or 3 or 4, as my eldest now is 4.5. That requires a lot of energy, a lot of emotional capacity, and a lot of flexibility, right? Because you're ending up, not treating them like they have to fit into your, into your life or into your boxes that you've laid out, but they come with their own needs and wants and opinions, not just about their body, but about what they want when they want. And so it's required a lot of my focus out there on them. And so I think it was very hard to realize, like, I've gone from what I felt like was this like super successful, skydiving, traveling thing. And plus, we had, a very wonderful time as a couple as well, which we've certainly grieved and still do grieve the loss of every now and then, because we're missing the sheer amount of time that we could spend alone. And because we're parenting how we're parenting, we've not left them alone for any period of time yet. We don't, we do have a bit of babysitting help, but we don't really go away for a week. We don't have grandparents nearby. And so, some people I think are very easy with, even younger than 1-year-olds to kind of just be like, they'll be fine, But I have made experiences with the girls where, they're not actually fine. And then I'm not going to have a good time going away if I know that, my youngest is breastfeeding, like she's waking up currently about 150,000 times a night, it feels like, in a sleep regression phase of sorts. And so she wouldn't be okay just sleeping over at someone else's house, and so my attachment wounding has made me make some hard choices, in terms of my parenting, which is really in their favor. But it also means like I've lost parts of myself. And then I was like, well, who do I want to be being now as mom and that version of myself? And I'm figuring this out every day. Like that's not a concluded thing. Just like work-life integration is not a process of getting there. It's a process of always getting present to what is, actually wanted, needed, seasonal, etc. Right? So,
I think that's tough, certainly, because I have 3 days a week at the moment when the kids are at nursery, which means those are my work days. But they're also, for example, today's a Monday. I went to the gym. I played racquetball in a league that I've joined. I mean, I'm total beginner. I went to the gym, done laundry, I'm going through. So by the time I start my day, half the day's gone. So out of the 3 work days, obviously, it's not actually sort of the usual 8 to 10 hours and so on. And I find that moment the real sort of reflection time is the stuff that's missing, not just because of the hours are limited, rather because my presence, I've just been with the kids 3 days. They're there all the time. That there's constantly mummy. There's just, as much as we love that time and so on, I found that the hardest thing is that there's just very little quiet and very little, just kind of, what is my meaning of life right now, right? So I get sort of the strategy done and I get the all my content and everything done. But yeah, the bigger sort of why are we here kind of questions, alas, are sometimes left to the bottom of the pile, which is a shame, which is why, of course, coaching and going on retreats, if at all possible, even if it's a mini retreat, for me, just going for a run or something is really helpful to have that peace of mind.
I totally get that. And I've gone from basically having about an hour to myself a week where I would go for a walk or something to really like slowly clawing back a little bit time here and there. But for example, I did go for a couple of months. I went back to CrossFit last summer, and it was just always like a 90-minute turnaround time. Like it was a long 50-minute drive there, and you do your hour and then you come back. And it was just not working for us as a family. And so we ended up finally buying a Peloton, so that's like me then doing 20 minutes instead of 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Or, and so it is really challenging, especially because I feel like I'm, you were saying 3 days a week, I really feel like I am with the kids 24/7. And, it's a relief sometimes when we have a babysitter, but it's not, we've tried varying levels of that, of like 3 hours and, per week to 20 hours a week. And we found that even at 20 and 25 hours, it wasn't giving me more relief, really. It didn't feel like, because I was still working at home, like it's still mommy. Like if I was out there right now, Lucy was just screeching, it'll be like mama, So she was just not ready for that really being deeply engaged in play last summer. So that's just starting now. And we obviously have activities with our local unschooling, homeschooling community twice a week, and we go to the library and stuff like that. But I'm also thinking like, I don't really want to hire a babysitter or nanny while I grow my business so they can unschool my children. That's kind of beside the point, right? And so it really just highlighted to me that it made it very clear that if I spend my time working, it has to be a very high value work. And otherwise, I don't really want to lose these years, especially the first 10 years when I'm still their most favorite person in the world, to building a business. I don't know. I have a business. It's over 6 figures. It can grow. Great. If it does, if it doesn't, not a problem. So I really only want to do things that I find valuable, that I love doing, that are like adding joy, and not just to be busy, and I've recently, I posted recently about this, where I was presented with an online business structure that would have me be lots of DMs and Zoom calls and sales calls. And I was like, that is just not how I want to spend my life. I don't want to have 20 calls booked in my calendar every week. That would make me so annoyed about the week on a Monday. Then I can just go get a job. And so it really had me evaluate different ways of growing the business in a very different way.
Yeah. And I love that post. I saw that. And that's one of the key questions I think people don't ask, perhaps, unfortunately, because again, when just starting out or with the pressure of cost of living and so on, now there is that kind of urgency of needing money in some cases if you don't have the privilege and the the achievement of already having the 6-figure whatever you need and want as a basis. And I think those are the questions we have to ask. There's so many, my goodness, my Instagram now is exploding. LinkedIn is like, hey, do you want to get 20 more calls? No, thank you, bye. But those are the kinds of things we have to keep resisting. And I'm with you, although I haven't I'm fascinated by all this unschooling and so on. It's not something that I've pursued, but my whole reason of being my whole business structure started because I wanted to be free and nomadic, and I was single and so on, like you now, and it allows me also to manage it alongside the kids. And if I were to put them into full-time childcare, we also haven't done a lot of we've had a babysitter once a few weeks ago to have a family dinner with my partner's family for an evening, a couple of hours, then that would kind of be beside the point for me. But these are such individual decisions, but I'm very much in the same place, and it makes it hard because, as we said, you hinted at it before, and as we talked before we started recording, I've been out of 10 years now of out. It sounds like I've been out of prison, which is sort of is to some extent. And so I reconsider things. I'm working more with corporates now, funnily enough, because I no longer have the baggage that I had of having to escape that environment. Now I see really exciting opportunities there, and my ambitions increase a little bit now that I'm sleeping a bit better and the kids are a little bit more independent and so on. So I think it's just so interesting. And I think that's the key takeaway from everything, is the evolution of these things. And you don't have to have all the answers. It's both stressful to some extent that you have to keep thinking about these things, but also hugely empowering and reassuring that we don't have to have all the answers, because it can and will evolve. And if you do have a few more minutes, I'd love to double click a little bit on what you mentioned in terms of the marketing stuff, which is a bit more mundane than all the fascinating meaning of life questions that we're looking at. But I'm curious because it's really insightful to hear, and I think reassuring to some people to hear that you've managed to build that 6-figure business on what sounds like quite a few hours. And as you said, referrals, obviously doing an amazing job and having that word of mouth and so on. I'm curious, what is it that's driving you now to want to show up more and to embrace all the marketing and the personal branding and so on?
Yeah, great question, because that was actually a huge breakthrough for me in this last 12-month period, because I was despising all of that marketing stuff. I was like, yuck, 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 and yuck. So I was really, ironically, having studied marketing and advertising, marketing communications officially in the UK, many moons ago, when there was no mention of TikTok, Instagram, not even Facebook. I think it came out the year I finished my studies. But anyway, I was really not interested in marketing, and I just observed a lot of coaches who maybe were really great marketers, but not very great coaches. And I also observed a lot of really amazing coaches doing very little marketing and not needing to, or wanting to. And so I was always like, I'm doing fine. Like, I was always just kind of getting clients as and when, it may have not been in the exact time that I would have wanted, or, when I kind of needed a bit more money, but it always sort of worked out in the end. And I also ended up working with a number of people for quite a few years, which one client I just converted into a business partner, basically, with the podcast that we host. Neil, he and I worked together for 5.5 years, and I still have clients that are going into the 6th and 7th year right now. So there wasn't a huge urgency for me to create more business, especially not through the little years. But what I really set my intention on in this last 12-month period was systems and structures. So I wanted to create more predictability and more ability to turn the tap on and turn the tap off. That was one part. And the other is that I wanted to build my body of work, as per Pam Slim, for this next decade. So in my 40s, I wanted to really build something that I'd become more known for, because I wasn't known by anybody really, because I wasn't out there. I wasn't producing anything of any value in terms of content, which is obviously now all over the world and the news and the media and stuff like that. So I hadn't found anything that was particularly joyful to produce. And I have a very fantastic defense mechanism of overanalyzing that keeps me from taking action. So that wasn't very helpful either. But I think because I've invested about 40,000 in my own personal coaching, leadership development program, and a business coaching engagement this year. And in that process, there were lots of things that one led to another, lots of those kinds of things. But really, I got intrigued because I became part of a group for a period of time where people weren't working to scale to 25K a month or 20K a month, which was roughly what I was looking at, but to 50K and 100K a month. So the way that they were thinking was very different to how I had been thinking before. And I was like, oh, what they can do, I could do. I mean, some of these people are 20 years old. Not that age is a factor, but you know what I mean? You kind of think, well, that can't be that hard. And so that changed my mind. And also I just became suddenly interested in the science of marketing, as in all the data points that can be measured and that lead to predictable outcomes, whether it's email marketing, kind of opening rates, conversion rates, click rates, all of these things and how they actually work. And so the more I learned about different forms of marketing, all the way through to affiliate marketing, for example, which you kind of, mentioned a little bit there with, just do this and you make 20 grand a week or whatever. I think it just opened my eyes to even more desire to want to build an actual sales funnel, because that is what then allows the predictability, what allows to, once you are building a community, which, I haven't really invested much time in, to have a product, to launch a product, to try something out. So yeah, I'm very deeply in that process right now. So I can't share many results, but I've run ad campaigns on Instagram. I've done lots of, professional video produced. I've had various different things that I've basically tried for myself and what makes me feel, good, alive still, same litmus test for me. And I've just really landed on, for now, on basically really showing that I live what I preach about work-life integration. And so one of the things I recently made a decision on is to not artificially through ads grow a Instagram handle at Coach Jana Hendrickson, but to reconsolidate everything back to my personal one. But the reason was I didn't want to mix like my children in. So I took all of my kids' stuff off where their faces are shown and stuff like that. And so we made some choices around that. But it wouldn't match if I'm talking about work-life integration to have two separate accounts. One that looks all polished.
Yeah, I love
and,
it.
It's all work. Which, I had some strange stories to tell about followers as well. But my point is that, I'm still in the process of that. And I feel like if I share about my life authentically and what's going on in my mind, what I'm learning, really inspired by a book called Share Your Work, then that's at least for me an alignment and with integrity. And then now I'm just going to wait to see what happens. Basically, I
think that's so valuable, and I think it's what people want to see, right? It's the authenticity and vulnerability, and it's documenting rather than creating. Unfortunately, It's so easy for people to present. I mean, my partner very generously often says to me that, a lot of people have like this massive showcase at the top and nothing much behind, and he very kindly says to me that I'm sort of the iceberg, that you can only see a bit and I've got so much more behind. And I think you're the same. What's amazing after 13 years in building your body of work is that when you do show up now with integrity, you're, as you said, role modeling the life that you're talking about, but also you have all the thinking and experience and so on, right? So it's really powerful. I think there's a bit of a there's a bit of a scarcity mindset, I guess, sometimes when we look at other people like, I could do that. But there's such power in showing up and sort of almost putting the blinders on and not thinking about what those other people are doing. And a lot of people resist, as you said, marketing, and so on, and personal brand. But if it's about sharing with boundaries around me too, I don't share pictures of the kids and so on, then I think that's a really lovely way of doing it. And I say to my clients all the time that it's the systems and structure that gives you the freedom, because I'm sure you experienced that too. When I first quit my job, I was like, no alarm, and I'm just going to go wherever my energy is. And that just turned out to not actually, it's a very pure sense of freedom initially, but it's also very superficial freedom that actually for true freedom, longer term, lasting, sustainable, these things, then obviously I say obviously, but it's been a lesson hard learned that it's those systems and structure flexibly that support that. Jana, I'm conscious of time, both for the listeners and for you. So I want to say thank you so much for sharing. My goodness, we could have talked in so many directions, and I hope we will continue, whether online or offline. What does success mean to you? I suppose it's always hard to wrap it up in a little bow, but briefly, with all the things that have evolved and the thinking and who knows what's coming next, how do you look at success right now?
Right now, for me, it really is about genuinely being in the moment and feeling that I do already have it all. And I say that because it's so tempting and constantly ongoing to do the comparison game and to think that another 100,000, another 300,000 or something else would give me more of something. But actually, if I can feel, if I can look in my daughter's eyes and I can just completely be present with her and just be super grateful that she's healthy, that we are all healthy, we have an amazing house and home that we build and that we just absolutely love, then what else is there that money could buy? You know what I mean? Like it's tempting to think, like I definitely get dragged into like more money will make things better. But I think, success for me right now means to be actually contented with what we have.
I think that's so powerful, and especially with the last few years, I think health is something we take for granted. And as we get older, parents' generation, and even around our age, I think that's a big thing. And learning about being present from kids is amazing, right? Because they're really not very worried about the future. They forget things that happened in the past. They really are truly present. I think that's an amazing thing that we can kind of relearn or unlearn, however we want to put it as well.
So. Constantly.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jana, for sharing. Thank you for that insight. Where can we find you if we want to follow your very wonderful, authentic family experience over there in Michigan.
Yeah, I am most active. I just love the platform of Instagram. So I'm most active there at I am Jana Hendrickson, Jana with a Jana, Hendrickson. And that's my handle. I am Jana Hendrickson. And then I have my website, which is just www.janahendrickson.com. But yeah, most active probably on that Instagram account compared to anywhere else. Just, enjoy meeting people, genuine, I just connected with another unschooling mom in the UK. So I just, that is the most fun for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's always been my favorite part, having these conversations and meeting people, whether it's Instagram or on podcasts or summits or whatever, to meet people that you just never would have. And again, a large part of that can be traced back to our interaction many years ago. So thanks again.
Wild, isn't it?
Thank you so much, Jana.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you're finding yourself stressed, torn between your work and your personal life and at risk of burnout, whether you're in a full-time corporate job or working for yourself, and even or maybe especially if you are successful from the traditional perspective of job title, salary, income, then now is the time to make some changes. It is absolutely possible, I believe and know it is possible, to have a thriving career, a thriving business, and also have time for everything and everyone else that matters in your life. Get in touch to book a free consultation to discuss how we can work together to help you reshape your business, reshape your priorities, so that business, so that your career fits around those priorities in your life, rather than trying to make it work the other way around. So you can book that free call at onestepoutside.com/call, and I look forward to speaking to you.